Hello, my name is Lena. Welcome to my channel, and I'd like to share with you my thoughts on Richard III, a tragedy by William Shakespeare. And I'd like to do it in less than 10 minutes. So, it was extremely confusing for me because the only thing I knew about the period it's the legend about the princess in the tower. So I did read the Wikipedia page about Richard III of England, but it didn't help me much initially from the start. It was extremely confusing because I forgot that once a queen is always a queen, so you have two kings and two queens here. I also had a feeling that every fourth man was called Edward and that every third man was called Richard. And every noble lord has at least two names, had at least two names, for example, like Lord Stanley, Ange Derby, and Lord Hastings, Ange Lord Chamberlain. It was extremely confusing for me, guys. So I tried to start with English version on my phone, the one I had from Gutenberg project, and I couldn't. I get through the first scene where Richard of Gloucester tells us that Yorks, the House of York, defeated the House of Lancaster, and they are enjoying peace right now. So then I got confused, and I've read first the Russian version translation, and I liked it very much. Then I returned to Wikipedia page. I read about War of the Roses. I read about Lady Anne. I read about Richard III of Gloucester, again, Richard III, and I read the play in original. But you know, I think Steve Donahue and Nastya from the channel Anna BBO3 AAV, they are right. You shouldn't read Shakespeare. You should listen to professional actors reading you Shakespeare. After I listened to the audiobook, when I listened to the audiobook, I actually enjoyed the play. But by this time, I knew what was going on. So if you are like me, if you don't know anything about history of England, you can read this play. The only thing you need to remember that it is these events, they are taking place right after the House of York defeated the House of Lancaster, and that you have in representatives of the members of the House of Lancaster, like King Henry VI, who is wounded and dying. You have his widowed daughter-in-law, Lady Anne, and you have his Queen Margaret. His son, Prince Edward, is dead. And then you have three brothers. The king, from the House of York, the king, who is Edward IV, Clarence, George Clarence, his brother, and Richard of Gloucester, Duke of Gloucester, who will become Richard III. Also, Edward IV, he is married to a widow, a Lady Grey, who is called Elizabeth, and she has two sons by him, who unfortunately is called Edward and Richard, but nevertheless it's not that important. She also has two sons by her previous marriage, and they're called Lord Grey and Marquis of Dorset. Marquis of Dorset. And if you will remember this, everything else will be much easier to you. I really enjoyed the play. I'd like to tell you that the second scene, the scene of wooing Lady Anne, didn't work for me. It didn't work for me in Russian translation. I was enraged. It didn't work for me in the original, but it did work when it was performed by actors. That's why I think you should listen to Shakespeare. Well, it has nothing to do with the play, but I'd like to tell you that I feel sorry for Lady Anne, for the real historical character, because millions and millions and millions of people know her like this kind, but stupid, and maybe even vain woman that was wooed right next to the body of your father-in-law. And I think it didn't happen this way in real life. It didn't happen this way. First of all, they knew each other, Richard and they knew each other from the time when they were children, I suppose. I do not remember the dates. And then her position was very undesirable. She didn't have children. She was a widow. She lost both her father and her father-in-law, and she was a ward of George, Duke of Clarence, because she was his wife's sister, and she couldn't really claim her lands. And George, he didn't want to marry her off. He wanted to have her father's lands all for himself. And so I don't think that she could marry somebody but Richard. And I don't think that she could retire to the monastery to become a nun, because George would never allow it, and George would not give her dowry to the monastery. You're supposed to make a gift for the monastery of your lands, and George would never allow it to happen. Would have never allowed it to happen. I don't know whether she wanted to become Richard's wife or whether she didn't. I just don't think that she has so many options that she could choose and pick. Well, that's all I wanted to tell you. And I'd like to know what you think about the tragedy Richard III. I think I will be able to find your videos if you make them, or you can leave comments. I would be happy to read and to answer. Well, thank you for watching. Goodbye and happy reading.